can't love or just you. I want you more. Yeah, you need some more. You do, you do, you do. But I can't love or just you. I want you as much as I want to. You gotta go with the flow. Something that I don't know, but I know I can't love or just you.
You mentioned you were in New Orleans you were in New Orleans for a few years, right?
About 5 or 6 years, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And what was how's the music scene there? I've never been, so
Uh, it, it's the music itself is amazing.
yeah.
It's I will say it's interesting depending who you are. If you're like a younger person these days who's not a musician, like one of my close friends is not a musician, he doesn't know anything about traditional music from New Orleans, which is kind of
Wow.
sad to me, even though it's
Yeah.
kind of all around you. And
Right.
it was for me, it was great to like finally take in what I already knew existed. Like I used to work, not work, I in university, I went to Stony Brook, and
Hmm.
my professor was named Ray Anderson, and he had done, I think, an album with Dr. John, and
Wow.
he would teach us all these tunes that like Bourbon Street Parade is one
Yeah.
people can go check out, and it's these like horn tunes from the second line bands down in New
Yeah.
Orleans, and I already kind of knew some of them. I didn't really put it together that he was just lifting them from New Orleans to show us that stuff, because it would be a mix of that and like Duke Ellington and whatever. And I didn't, but I really, really love that stuff. It's it pretty much all has the same beat, don't.
Yep.
Um, it's sort of the Bo Diddley beat. It's sort of like the
Right.
clave from like you know from the not from America.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Yeah.
go 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 go. Yeah. So and it is cool to spend time there and really hear all that music around you. A lot of it is based off tourism these days, but
Okay.
uh I did do like they have second lines for locals. They also do that for it's originally it was for funerals, but they have weekly second lines that one of my good friends Joseph goes to. He's not a musician, but he's obsessed, and he's like the whitest guy, but everybody like accepts him because it's the group is usually not white, and they know him
Right.
as like being the best dancer in town, and like
Oh, that's
literally I'll go.
amazing.
Yeah, we'll like go places and people are like, "Oh, you're always at the second line." He just really gets down. Like, I have so many videos. Like, maybe I can send you a video to insert so you can see.
Yes, please.
Uh, and I love going to that because they would have the brass bands, but it's all locals dancing for like
Wow.
they walk for like a mile or two, and it's just the best experience. That's really cool. Getting to know some of the local traditions that, sadly, like I said, other certain sectors of the local people don't really participate in. People from the
Yeah.
suburbs or whatever. But for me, it was great to be surrounded by that. I worked on Bourbon Street for about a year in two different places, playing
Wow.
piano, sometimes solo, and I found myself being kind of one of the only guys that would play more of the traditional stuff. But it's still cool. And living down there, I had the opportunity, like for instance, to literally run into the bass player from the Meters, named George Porter Jr. And they're so
Wow.
legendary. He's played on a million tracks. They have their famous song "Sissy Strut," which everyone should go
Yes.
listen to,
Yep.
and super funky. They toured with the Grateful Dead, and they kind of helped spread New Orleans music around the world, uh, including Professor Longhair. Professor
Yeah.
Longhair. They sort of
Wow.
brought him out of retirement, um, and he has a couple like standards that are escape me right now, piano standards, and they brought him out of retirement in like the 70s, and they're super funky. So yeah, I ran into him in like
Oh,
2021, and it's crazy the people that live in New Orleans, like Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin lives there. I think he's like my friend's
really?
neighbor. Yeah.
What? I
Um,
didn't know that. Oh my
yeah, he lives there.
gosh.
Ray Davies from the Kinks used to live there until
Wow.
he got shot.
Oh,
And, and that
that's
will tell you
horrible.
a lot about, yeah, that'll tell you a lot about New Orleans without me going into details. It is like the Wild West. And there, I would recommend if you're a musician heading to Frenchman Street first, but the truth, which is in the French Quarter essentially,
Mhm.
but at kind of at the other end of where the real tourist New Orleans bars are. The touristy bars play like Sweet Home Alabama. They play like current hits, and it's not that exciting. But on
Mhm.
Frenchman Street, you'll find a lot of this like brass band music I'm talking about. It's really
That's the
funky. You
stuff.
might not have heard it before.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll do really cool covers with the brass bands, but they're so unique, and it's just like, oh yeah. I mean, I could go on and on.
This is fantastic. I love it.
For
And it's
instance,
all
wait,
important.
I'll tell you one
Yeah.
more thing. Like
Okay.
you'll see people jamming on the street, and I was in City Park in New Orleans, and actually was one of the first places I played music in New Orleans. I brought a little accordion, and we had this like ragtag little band trying to like work for tips at this restaurant there, which is now a satellite location of Cafe Du Monde in City Park.
Wow.
Highly
Okay.
recommend going to check that area out. It's very like swampy and picturesque in the park.
Oh,
But I ended up seeing this band playing, and I recognized some of the locals. But there was this guy in his, I want to say, 80s, and he also lives in New Orleans, and he was like an original musician with Benny Goodman, the big band
wow.
clarinet player.
Yeah.
And so
Yep.
like I got to jam with that guy randomly. You know, you just
Oh,
meet all these cool people down there, and it is a really laid back, unique place. Really, really humid, and but the storied history. Yeah,
yeah.
it's great.
It sounds so inspiring.
A
To,
little bit.
yeah.
I wish I had done more, learned more local, like worked with some local musicians more. Because a lot of times what I do is a lot of like cover stuff. Trying to get
Right.
people to sing along is the number one thing, and dance along, drink along, clap along. That's like part of that script I was telling you about.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
definitely, you know, you you lose some of the local flavor in those cover band
Sure.
or dueling
Right.
piano spots. But I do recommend everyone go there and check out Pat O'Brien's is like the first place dueling pianos existed, supposedly about 100 years ago. And
Wow.
then there are other piano bars nearby. But they've lost their luster over the years. So probably head to Frenchman Street if you're in New Orleans. You'll see all the funky stuff, and it's great.
I love that recommendation. That's awesome. Yes. I
Yeah,
mean, I'm obsessed with second line drumming. It's so fun and funky, and the connection, like you said, to kind of um to the clave
right.
stuff is just it's so cool. It's so cool. And I think so important for yeah, not just drummers, but I think for all musicians to kind of know a little bit about that. Like, you just start to see how you could see how like music, so much of music kind of evolves out of there.
Right.
Like
Uh, to your point, Preservation Hall is like a historic room in New Orleans, just off of Bourbon Street, where they play like only traditional New Orleans music. Which, by the way, Dixieland, that term has fallen out of favor a little bit. So if
yeah.
I say traditional jazz or trad jazz, it means the same thing. It's music based on like marching bands and mixed with,
Mhm.
you know, from like John Philip Sousa, which is like way back,
Yeah.
mixed with, like all these like rootsy elements that turned into jazz, and also actually based a lot off like Jelly Roll Morton piano
Right.
playing and stuff like that. Um,
Yeah.
and then turned into these like marching bands and whatever. So anyway, uh, I just had the name. Oh yeah, Preservation Hall, who's like carried the torch for I think since the 60s or maybe before that, and the room that they play in hasn't changed.
Wow.
And when people come to town, like Robert Plant, he sits in with them. I think like Springsteen sat in with them like recently. So everybody reveres this group, and it is like rotating musicians. But if you watch some of their larger performances from Jazz Fest or on the Grammys, they'll support other artists. There's usually this bass player or sousaphone tuba player with the big hair, and I think his dad started that room. Anyway, I've only been there once, and they played a tune that I haven't heard since, or haven't played in like 20 years, and that is Saint Thomas, which is yeah, super common standard. It's sort of an islandy flair, and I think they called it as sort of a joke because they don't really have a set list. But
Okay.
he went on to explain, I think before and after the tune, how it has everything to do with um, tunes like that have everything to do, and jazz and music in general, with this melting pot in New Orleans where you have, you know, people coming up and down the Mississippi, and then you have the Caribbean right there, and you
Hmm.
have European influences. And in that particular case, you know, he was explaining how St. Thomas, that tune, really like is about the spice trade and just like how lots of, you know, music and culture, whatever, made its way to New Orleans. And I thought that was fascinating because I also felt like
Yeah.
he was just, at first I thought he was kind of a cop out to call that tune, but
Okay.
it was amazing. And it's like the best musicians ever with this completely different flair from what I would have played back in New York. Everybody understands that clave thing, and I just can't explain how exciting it was to hear them play St. Thomas, which again is a song that
Yeah.
is, I could, you know, leave or take or leave. But it was pretty incredible. And you do have like these amazing musicians from everywhere um, coming to New Orleans and creating these different styles. Even like I think it's called bounce music, which is
Okay.
Big Frida. It's this whole like their own version of like hip hop that's like straight from New
Wow.
Orleans, and she's on Beyonce's albums doing her thing.
Oh,
And so like
wow.
it's still, New Orleans is still influencing
Yeah.
you know, music around the world, which is pretty cool.
It's
Yeah,
so cool. It's incredible. I love it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Can't send no one wishes cause you ain't get your ticket.